Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of June 4th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles. They analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and set an increase in movement in the market. And boy, oh boy, has there been a lot of increase for Spider-Man related books. But before I get into it, if you guys could drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, doing all those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into this video here today. Now, of course, I will put a link to the article in the description. It is written by Matt Tuck if you guys want to do your own reading, but I will break it down for you here this week. And we have a very, very strong theme to talk about. Of course, all of these books in some ways relate to Into the Spider-Verse. I probably will do a video later this week actually really diving into the Into the Spider-Verse, secondary market, what's kind of going on in that situation. Obviously, we got to cover the Go Collect trending list, and there's some crossover here, but I really want to get more in the weeds later on in another video. But coming in here at the number 5 spot is a great book, a modern grail. This one right here is Edge of the Spider-Verse number 2, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 70th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 2014, written by Jason Latour, and would feature the first appearance of Gwen Stacy, otherwise known as Spider-Gwen. Now, like I already said in my preamble, a lot of the books on this list this week are going to be related to the Into the Spider-Verse sequel, and I do think that that is probably going to be the big story overall, where it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of the books trend after the fact. Usually going into a movie is when you might start to see some of the books hit the trending list, but here we are coming off of the heels of what was basically a very successful weekend, a very positively reviewed movie, and a lot of the books are now sort of bubbling up in the trending list, and I have a feeling that for the next couple weeks, we're going to continue to see these books topping the charts and on the trending list because of the success and the hype of the movie. But this one right here, of course, Spider-Gwen, she's one of the main characters in that film, and this being her first appearance was, of course, going to bring the book to the list. And I actually do think that this is probably one of the better modern grails that you may want to consider picking up for yourself. I think that Gwen Stacy is probably second in line, a lot higher than that of Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or Jane Foster Thor, or Falcon Captain America, or Riri Williams Iron Man, like those types of characters. I think that, Miles and Gwen, due to the fact that they are related to the Spider-Verse, which is just that much more popular, are always going to be more popular in proxy because of the fact that these characters relate to the Peter Parker Spider-Man universe, which just frankly is a lot bigger than that of those other characters. And this book right here has been an interesting one because, one, there are a lot of prints of this book. There's also a lot of Ultimate Fallout prints. So this book has had, kind of a slow and steady, hemorrhaging of value over the course of this last, year and a half or so. Let's dig into the numbers and take a look at that uptick and kind of break it down here. Census had it as 6,684 universal copies. There's actually 5 9.9s in the census. 9/8 have 3,339. So that is a pretty decent amount, which I will break down in a second. Fair market value, $11.50. 1 year was $12.69. 90-day was $10.68. And now 30-day is $10.72. So up a little bit on the average this particular month. As you guys can see, this is a book that shot up all the way up to $2,000 in May of 2021, had a big pullback, then shot up once again in early 2022, up to the $2,100 range again. And ever since, early 2022 has been on basically the slow and steady decline until we got to right around here, where now we're starting to see the book level out. Maybe a couple sales at the fixed price eBay at the $1,300 range, where the auctions are leveling at around the $1,000 range. And this is definitely a book that still has a little bit of risk when you're talking about buying into it. I mean, the 9/8 rate is 50%, so not a difficult book to find in 9/8, which, makes me think that there's still a lot of raw candidates out there that could hit that 9/8 level. And one of the things that is a little bit concerning with this book is if you rewind the clock back to, March and April of 2020, this was only a $450 book. And they got a sudden overnight doubling in late 2020, jumping up to basically the $1,000 range, and then going on to the comic book boom that we saw, and now kind of hovering around this level at the $1,000 mark. You have to wonder if this is still slightly overinflated from where it was, back in early 2020. This is going to be a similar thing that I talk about with a lot of these books, and it's a little bit concerning. Obviously, with the hype of the movie, people are really excited about this book. That's going to give it a momentary lift. So maybe this book can sort of float for the next couple of years, based on hype until we get to a better economic time. So maybe it isn't a risk overall, but I feel like Q3, Q4 later in the year, we could see this book coming down ever so slightly even more. And then, of course, down here at the bottom, I'm not going to see it slabbed to the low grade. But when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $400, $500, $600, maybe $700 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the fourth hottest trending comic of the week. And the fourth hottest trending comic of the week is one that is interesting to see on this list. Kind of makes sense, but let's kind of dive into this. This, of course, is Amazing Spider-Man #1 Facsimile Edition, new to the list, now sitting in the 56th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby that came out in 1962, although this is the facsimile, so it was the reprint that came out much, much later, and would be the first issue in the Amazing Spider-Man run, the second appearance of Spider-Man. Now, as to why this book is showing up on the list this week, well, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. Of course, we're talking about the Into the SpiderVerse movie, which is related to, the Spider-Man universe, so a lot of people wanting to pick up those Spider-Man keys. Later on this year, we're also going to be getting the Kraven movie, which has been confirmed that Chameleon is in it, and of course, ASM #1 is the first appearance of Chameleon, so maybe people are thinking, hey, I know it's not the original, but it's still cool to have, a facsimile of this book. It's still a very important cover, and people, just like to have it as something that is in their collection. So a lot of touch points into the Spider-Man universe. And then as Matt points out in the article, we're also about to get the sequel of the Spider-Man video game that was so successful, just a couple years back. So maybe just a lot of people are thinking, hey, I just want to add, kind of an iconic cover to my collector shelf. And people are thinking that this facsimile is a good way to do so. Obviously, the facsimile thing is something that is very interesting. There are certain facsimiles that you'll notice that do have a lot of value in the secondary market. And when I say a lot, I put that in quotations, but certain books like AF-15, the facsimile, or ASM-1, the facsimile, or maybe, Fantastic Four 1, the facsimile, books that are actually unaffordable for most common collectors do command still a little bit of a higher sticker price because of the fact that people just want to have them in their collection, and they represent a book that they will likely never have. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 1,003 universal copies. 9.9s actually have 16, and those probably do command a little bit of value. But let's talk about the 9.8s. 932 on the census, so a very, very high 9.8 rate. Fair market value is 65. 1 year is 56, and 30-day moving is 58. So definitely a book not going to go to the moon. I mean, you're basically paying, the cost of the book and to send it into CGC for this thing. But when it comes to having a nice little collector item that looks nice on the shelf that represents sort of a piece of history, it makes sense as to why people would want it. Then down here at the bottom, of course, you're not going to see it slapped at the low grade. But when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $10 to $15 to maybe $20 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is one that is bucking the trend of the other books on this list. Kind of an outlier, but of course we're talking about Micronauts #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 28th slot, so all the way up there. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1979, written by Bill Mantlo, that would feature the first appearance of the team known as the Micronauts. Now, the Micronauts are a really interesting IP within the Marvel Universe because they're actually outside of what the MCU has. I think they actually do belong to Hasbro. So there's been a lot of conversation of the Micronauts maybe getting their own franchise or their own movie, or there was even some speculation at a time that the Micronauts might pop up in the Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania movie because they have, all these relations to the quantum realm and things like that. So the Micronauts have kind of been this weird property that people have been speculating on, but we haven't seen, have any sort of movement or traction. But, as we take a look at this book, on the list this week and think about why it might be showing up, well, there's been still a lot of that speculation. Of course, we're about to get the Transformers Rise of the Beast movie. That, of course, is a Hasbro property, so maybe people are thinking about the Hasbro IPs. There's also been a lot of talks about ROM getting its own series. ROM is another one like Micronauts that has relations to Marvel, but it actually belongs to Hasbro. There seems to be some movement for the ROM franchise, maybe getting some kind of, tie into the Transformers universe. So maybe people are thinking, hey, A plus B equals C with this one, and the Micronauts might be next up on the charts. And this book has been moving a lot this past week. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 3,337 universal copies, 9.8s, 848. Fair market value is only 190. 1 year is 191, and 30-day moving 163. So not too expensive overall at the 9.8 range. I mean, I don't know how many Micronauts fans there are, but I suppose enough to give this a little bit of demand. And you can see that this is a book, that has had a lot of volatility, a lot of randomness to to it, based on speculation. Obviously had a big speculation in 2019, maybe when people were thinking that the Micronauts would be coming, had a big pullback, then shot up in 2021, and now still is kind of hovering around a price that, effectively is still above the inflated price when you rewind the clock all the way back to 2018 and 2019. Last couple sales, around that $180, $170 range. And then of course, 9.6s drop off right away. And then down at the bottom, $19.79 in a book. Not going to see it slabbed at the low grade. But when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you can see them being sold around that $20 to $25 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is Back to the Spider-Verse. This one right here is, of course, a book that you guys know very, very well. Of course, we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 365, up 19 spots, now sitting in the number 9 slot, all the way in the top 10. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1992, written by David Michelinie, that would feature the first cameo appearance of Spider-Man 2099 and would feature that classic hologram cover. Now, I remember when this book came out, it was definitely a big deal in my comic book store. A lot of people remember this book. It's an instant classic, an iconic cover, and obviously printed to the moon with this one. So definitely not a book that has a tremendous amount of value on the secondary market, unless we're talking about the newsstand edition, because this is a year where the newsstands start to, really become much more scarce than that of the direct edition copies. But we're not going to talk about that. This one right here, of course, is the direct edition. And of course, this is a book that has gotten hot this week because this did have a preview section for Spider-Man 2099. Now, a lot of people talk about Spider-Man 2099 number 1 as being the first true appearance of that character. This is kind of a Hulk 180, Hulk 181 situation. I feel like if you're a fan of Spider-Man 2099, that book is probably a lot more pleasing as far as a cover is concerned because he's on the cover. But, this one also has a shiny foil cover or hologram cover, so it's kind of hard not to want to pick up this one up as well. And due to the fact that this is in the ASM run, is going to be a book that everyone who collects Spider-Man is going to need to have to complete their collection, which is why it's always going to be desirable in the market, and it's always going to be a part of the Spider-Man 2099 conversation. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 8,115 universal copies. 9.8 has 2,412, so a pretty decent 9.8 rate. This is, again, one of those books that had a heavy card stock, so a lot of them were able to maintain, a pretty decent cover, although obviously very easy to get spine ticks on that black cover. Fair market value 230, 1 year 205, 30-day moving 184. So probably an increase in volume with this book, but not necessarily record prices. As you guys can see, this is a book that, like other books, got inflated in 2021. Actually, there were times in 2019 when this book was sitting a little bit higher, probably coming off of the original Into the Spider-Verse film, where of course we got the tease of Spider-Man 2099. So a lot of speculation for this book, and now kind of where it sits, kind of hovering right around that 2019 price. And then of course down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $20 to $25 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's go on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is probably no surprise right here. Go Collect, you're killing me with your graphics not being able to load right now. But of course, we're talking about Ultimate Fallout number 4, up 22 spots, now sitting in the number 2 slot, the number 2 book out there in the market. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2011, written by Brian Michael Bendis, that would feature the first appearance of Miles Morales' Spider-Man. Now, like I said many times in this video, of course, we're coming off of the sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. We had the film this past weekend. A lot of people loved it. Box office records, all of those things. Everyone is excited about Miles Morales' Spider-Man. I, again, will probably do a market report video later on this week because I think there's a lot of other topics to dive into to talk about this. But it is very, very impressive to see that the success of the movie has been able to catapult, what is already a very expensive book into the number 2 slot. When you're talking about, volume of sales here, at a number figure range that is as high as this is, that's quite a lot of sales, right? Quite a lot of movement in the market to get it all the way to the number 2 slot, which again, I think goes to show how popular this book has been, this last week or so. Now, of course, everyone is hyped about the Miles universe. Everyone is hyped for this character, probably the most significant modern Marvel character that there is or has been created, at least in the last, say, 30 years or so. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 15,132 universal copies, so quite a lot out there. Not to mention there's, still second prints, there's variant covers, there's things like that. So you have to compare this to, a Census more around the New Mutants 98 range, or you got to compare it to Hulk 181 levels, things like that. 98s have 3,937 on the Census. Fair market value is 2,000. 1 year was 2057. 90-day was 1808, and 30-day is 1848. So a slight uptick, over the course of these last 30 days. And we have seen a decent amount of, higher sales, a $2,100 here, a $2,000 here, an auction finishing at 23, a 2,000 there, and 1850 here. So definitely a book that is selling a little bit higher than it was, say, in the previous couple months. But, you have to wonder, is that a temporary, rise in the value? Is this going to fall off later on in Q3, Q4? 9.6s fall off kind of right away down to the $600 range. And then there's a lot of price consolidation here in the 9.4 to 8.0 range. Then down here at the bottom, not going to see it's lab to the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $600 to $650 to $700 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week. What do you guys think? Did you guys see the movie? Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you all in the next video.